Good. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Steve Haines. I'm fascinated by pain and trying to work with pain. So I trained as a chiropractor. I did a lot of yoga, a lot of massage, and some of the models I was given didn't quite fit and didn't seem to help me help people enough. So this talk is really based on things that I learned that seem to work much better than a pure structural model around pain. We're talking 45 minutes or so, just going through some core ideas around what pain is or isn't. So if you can see the screen, pain is really strange. That's the title really celebrates the complexity of pain. And for me, complexity is wonderful. It's beautifully complex. The complexity frees us, actually. The complexity means there's lots and lots of tools we can use to change our pain experience. And so, yeah, don't be daunted by the complexity. For me, that's not a problem. It's actually helps us find a range of solutions. Some of the frameworks for the talk of the 45 minutes will be pain is a perception. So understanding that it's not a linear fixed process. It's much richer and involves all sorts of things about you. We'll look at some classic definitions of pain, some of the ones in the literature, and they're quite surprising often. They're not simple. They celebrate complexity. The research definitions and the International Association of Pain, their definitions and how they frame pain. We'll look at the notion of stories and metaphors, the idea that there's always a story. Part of the way of making sense of complexity is to honor the story and realize that stories are important. We're much more about stories and sensitivities than we are structures. So my focus, my understanding of modern pain science is that sensitivities more than structures. Really focus on the things that make you sensitive. And often that involves things like I feel old, I feel broken, I feel as though I'm permanently damaged. Those ways of talking about pain, those ways of constructing pain tend to make us more helpless and tend not to serve us very well in changing our pain experience. So yeah, we'll look at metaphors and stories. And then finally, we're going to use principles to change pain. We'll look at some things that are really rooted in good practice and modern pain science about things that anybody can do to begin to get a foothold into the difficult challenge of the mountain of pain and begin to climb that mountain differently, work with it differently. So some common principles that work well for many, many people, even with the most horrible, most difficult pain, things that you can do right now, actually, to start the journey of changing your pain experience. So I'm relying on the question and answer to if people have got any big questions, or also the chat. So I'll be pausing every 10, 15 minutes. There's 4 sections to this talk. So I'll be pausing every so often just to gather any questions and see if I'm missing anything. This is a webinar rather than a Zoom meeting. So a webinar means you just get to see me on a side view, I hope, and you get to see the main screen. Good. Let's dive in. So the main purpose of the talk, hour and a half, I've booked it out for. So first 45 minutes, just focusing on pain. Pain is really strange. And then 10, 15 minutes, just purely question and answers and seeing if I can help and clear up any of the things that aren't clear from the talk. And then the last half an hour, I teach 2-year programs in using touch to change pain. So kind of talking about a model that I really like of relational touch or craniosacral therapy. That bit sort of is the last half hour. We'll be focusing on just exploring that model of working with pain. Good. Okay. Well, pain is really strange. This is me. I wrote a book, God, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago now, my God. Yeah, that's doing really well. Publishers use the phrase bestseller, which is really nice. They've done 4 of them now. Pain is really strange. Trauma is really strange. Anxiety is really strange. And touch is really strange. So yeah, short book, short and sweet, trying to explain something complex with images and graphics, trying to really find metaphors and stories that really are sticky for people. First up, is there a problem of pain? Do we need to worry about it? Well, gosh, yes. These are huge studies. 2006, the Breivik one is really, really influential. And also the 2014 one was an American study. Sorry, a big European study. So the classic figures are 1 in 5 people experience persistent pain. And this is pain states, persistent pain. The medium amount of time is months, but typically their persistent pain states can last for many years. And this is moderate to severe pain on the ways that they assess this. So that's an extraordinary amount of pain. 1 in 5 people in moderate to severe pain for many months, and this lasting for many years. It's not unfair to talk about a pain epidemic, really. Some studies, this other study, 2014, talking about 30% of people in persistent pain. So absolutely a huge problem. And we don't really know how to treat persistent pain. So one of the strategies is better drugs, but some of the drugs that have been prescribed aren't good drugs, actually. There's an opioid crisis. So in America, they've had a huge over-prescription of opioids for 15, 20 years now. And it can lead to all sorts of addiction issues and drug overdoses. And the truth is that opioids stop working after a while for persistent pain. So they're not even a good drug to prevent the symptom, aside from their addictive issues. And all this data from America, and it's been reproduced in Australia. Australia is catching up with America in terms of its opioid prescription rates, even though we know that it's a really compromised way of working with pain. So 2019, Australia has failed to heed the lessons of the United States and is now facing skyrocket rates of opioid prescriptions and related deaths. And the best practice, so science has caught up with this. We know that opioids aren't a great way of working with persistent pain, but still, even if the guidelines from the official bodies are say, do not prescribe opioids, they're still getting prescribed. So here's a study from Sweden. More than half the incident opioid dispensations to patients within their first year after knee or hip osteoarthritis diagnosis are inappropriate according to the current treatment guidelines. So the best standard practice done by regulatory bodies is don't prescribe these things, but it's still happening in half the cases of people with knee and hip osteoarthritis diagnosis in Sweden. Gosh, that's a problem. Pain's awful and people need to do something, and drugs are a way of doing something, even though we know that some of the drugs that are prescribed don't work that well, lead to addiction, can predict early death, and are kind of recommended against. So yes, there is a problem around pain. 1 in 5 people in persistent pain, and we don't really know how to treat it. And even if we have guidelines, they tend to be ignored for relatively quick fixes. That's hard, isn't it? So let's try and dive into what pain is. So I'm going to talk about pain as a perception and just the process of perception and why that's relevant to pain. So pain is a perception. I'm very much teaching from this paradigm. Let's look at the process of perception. So here's an illusion. The 2 orange circles in the middle are the same size, but your brain is screaming at you, no, they're not. So the context around this one, the things that are big around it, make this look relatively small. And because these contexts here, these are relatively small, this makes this look relatively big. I guarantee that these 2 dots are the same size. So your brain's making a mistake here. And unfortunately, perception is not an accurate representation of the world. Perception is a process of extracting meaning that is useful and important and often quite quick. Here's another illusion. So the figure in the middle is obviously a B, isn't it? If you go A, B, C, and the context here, then obviously it's a B. However, if you change your perspective and go downwards, 12, 13, 14, it's obviously a 13. So the context and the things around the experience determine the meaning that you extract. It's very hard to think of it or conceive of it as 13 and B at the same time. Our brain doesn't like that. That's too much sugar. It takes too much energy to do that. So complexity is quite difficult for the brain. We tend to do simple things. We tend to give up when we have a good enough approximation to what's happening. And holding dual meanings and complexity takes effort, takes sugar, takes resources, and we rarely devote that. Look at another optical illusion. This is just phenomenal. So all the horizontal lines you can see in this picture are actually parallel. Let me say that again. All the horizontal lines are actually parallel. So here's some horizontal lines. I'm going to put them over the diagram we've just seen. So, gosh, even with the extra horizontal lines in, there's so much noise that confuses you that those horizontal lines look anything but horizontal. So again, my brain is taking in information. There's raw sensations and raw experience here, but the story I make up, the meaning, I need to interpret it in particular ways. And the confusion of the other information fools my brain into saying that the lines aren't horizontal. So yeah, perception is important and it's tricky and it needs time and sugar to really work out what's going on. So let's hold on to that. Let's look at some strange examples of pain. This is a lovely story described by Patrick Wall. He's a real giant of pain. He died now, but came up with a very influential theory, the gate theory of pain, Wall and Melzack. And he continued to write until he died, died 20 years ago, I think now. This is a lovely book if you want to read about pain. So he tells this story. So Amin bin Wid threw his amputated leg at Imam Ali. And you can see the picture here. So these two people are fighting. You can see, I'm assuming they're cities in the background. Amir bin Wid got his leg cut off. Now, my assumption would be if my leg was cut off, I'd be writhing around in agony, not Amir bin Wid. He picked up his own leg and he threw it at his assailant. So something extraordinary must be going on there, mustn't it? He had a different meaning or a different perception at that moment. The priority was not his bodily integrity, his body integrity. The priority was defending his city, his family, his things that he loved. To the point where his body was unimportant in this context, the gesture to keep fighting and acting was the thing that dominated his consciousness, dominated his perception. Wow. So massive tissue damage in this case, and no obvious pain experience. He might have been in pain later, he probably died, I assume, but his initial gesture was to keep fighting and I'm assuming not writhing around in pain. Here's another great story. This is a more modern version of this. So this is a skier. The picture's a little gruesome. Let's see. So this was a ski instructor who was skiing on his own in a fresh powder day, and he was bouncing down the mountain and he skied through a tree and something hit him. So he didn't really know what was happening, but he got impaled on the tree. He skied down like this, and this is pictures from the hospital. This is him talking about his pain experience. So this picture is amazing. He looks like Jesus here, doesn't he? A sort of archetypal image. So he said, I thought maybe my chin strap got pushed up into my face. So I tried to brush it off. And then that's when I felt the stick. Holy crap, I just got impaled, Hadgood said. And then I yelled over to his mate, Pete, hey, look, I got a new piercing. Wow. So he's got massive tissue damage and no pain. He was focused on his skiing. He felt something on his face and he just assumed it was innocuous until he felt this weird thing sticking out of his lip. And we had this big, rough, tough skier who skied all the way down with this thing impaled in his face. The most painful part of the experience was the numbing shots from the hospital. I think that's really, really strange. A very unusual experience of massive tissue damage, but non-painful initially. Keep breathing for this one. So here's another example of tissue damage, but this has been voluntarily applied. So for some people in religious models or ecstatic devotional models can do incredible self-piercings. Don't want to look at that too much. So phenomenal, really, that someone can do that to themselves. So what's happening there? The meaning, the ecstasy, the taking part in the community of whatever the meaning is in that community is that my bodily integrity is less important than the gesture of being embedded in the community. And yeah, it's famous. People who do those voluntary piercings don't have much blood flow. Their whole physiology changes. So they have created an internal perceptual state that means they minimize their stress response. They limit things like bleeding, and they don't have protective reflexes that cause them to contract. Incredible. Pain is really strange. Here's an image of a man who fell. He was a 22-year-old man who fell from a ladder or a standing height, but had no pain, weakness, or loss of sensation for 2 months. Now, if you look at his neck, for the chiropractors out there, this really shouldn't be happening. Look, that's the neck. It should keep going straight. He's got a massive dislocation at C4, C5. This would be truly terrifying if you ever saw this on an X-ray. He's lucky to be alive, to be honest. You can see here the dislocation of C4 moving forward, and he's pressing on his spinal cord. This really is not good news, folks. And he presented with no pain, massive tissue damage. He had a bit of neck stiffness 2 months after the accident. Wow, incredible. You cannot look at structures on X-rays and predict how much pain people are going to be in. It's always more complex than that because pain is a perception. It depends on the context, the meaning, the stories. All the things that are happening inside that person are relevant to whether they decide or their brain decides for them whether this is a pain experience or not. Let's keep going with structures and just really deconstructing the idea that pain is linear. So Usain Bolt, the fastest man in the world, incredibly fast, endless gold medals. No one's ever run as fast as Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt's back is phenomenal. He has this massive scoliosis. My spine is curved really bad. The scoliosis doesn't really bother me. I don't have to worry about it as long as I work hard. So even though his body isn't symmetrical and he doesn't have a straight spine, this is someone that performs at the most elite level we've ever seen in a sprinter, and he's absolutely fine. He is adapted, he's flexible, and he doesn't have a pain experience. The shape of his spine doesn't mean that he's going to be in pain. And this is a universal truth. You cannot determine the amount of pain someone is going to be in by looking at the structure, by looking at X-rays or MRIs. And that's hard because that's not the surface model of pain. That's not how people feel pain works. So we've looked a little bit at perception and a little bit at some strange features of pain. I'm going to stop the share there and just see if there's any particular questions emerging. So just give me a bit of feedback on the chat or the Q&A and just let me know that this is making sense and people can hear me. Pretty, I hope your screen freeze is sorted out. Any raised hands? All great. Renato, thank you. Good. Anything that's not making sense for people? We're okay so far and people can hear and the pace is okay. Great. Good. Okay. Such a strange world, Zoom. You have to rely on thumbs up and little comments. So I'll keep an eye on the chat. If there are any big questions, I'll take a pause again and see if I can answer them. Remember, there's about after 45 minutes of me talking, I'll pause and do Q&A. Great. Okay, let's keep going. So we've looked at pain as a perception. So this is quite a hot debate in pain circles. Is pain a perception or is pain a sensation? Well, to be honest, it's really, there's not much difference between pain as a perception and pain as a sensation. I would reserve sensations for raw physiology, the idea that we're hot, cold, tight, soft, the idea that things are the underlying sort of raw feeling state. It's things feel tight or things feel warm or things, there's a quality of stretching. The interpretation of raw sensation is a perception. The philosophical difference between the two isn't that useful, and certainly isn't that useful to help people understand. I'm offering that pain is a complex response to the raw feeling of something that's dangerous. So let's get into that, some definitions of pain and pain models, pain definitions and models. So historically in Western thought, all the way back to Greeks, is that pain was seen as something complex. Pain was seen as the opposite of pleasure. Pain is not one of the five senses, but is a passion of the soul, a quote from Aristotle, a Greek philosopher. So in the history of Western thought, there's always been this notion that pain is complex and it's on the territory of emotions and it's the opposite of pleasure. It's something that's always complex. It's not like those simple five senses of taste, touch, smelling and seeing. So nice, even in Western thought, which gets very linear sometimes and really privileges science and rationality, we understand, or the history of Western thought is that pain is actually a complex thing. The history of pain changing from something complex to something linear has many strands, but one strand can be traced back to Descartes. Descartes was a genius. If people are talking about me within a week's time, I'm going to be super happy. We're talking about Descartes 400 years later. He made extraordinary insights into the human condition. He may not have been right about some of them, and they may have had huge consequences. But please hear me, Descartes was an absolute genius at summarizing arguments and making incredible insights into the human condition. He first started to think about pain as a linear experience. He conceived of pain as a specific alarm system. This is an image from one of Descartes' books. And here you have this image of the boy putting his foot in the fire, and he conceived of a thread or a pulley system that rings a little bell in the brain. And this linear model of pain, there's a fixed input that leads to a specific regular output, became the dominant paradigm around pain. And it certainly got reinforced by medical imaging. The early days of imaging, only the people in pain were x-rayed or put through MRIs. They do the MRI and see this sort of arthritic joint or see something that didn't look optimal. And they'd say, this must be the cause of your pain. You have a back of a 70-year-old, or you've got arthritic spine, and that's bad for you, and that's what's causing your pain. It was very much a linear model. We can see something that we don't think is optimal, and we're saying that's the cause of your pain. And that's what led to all sorts of surgeries, actually. If your joint isn't clean and you're in pain, let's file down the rough edges. Let's clean up the joint. If your joint is moving strangely, it's too unstable, then let's fix the joint. We'll take away that instability. That'll take away the noisy pain signals and you'll be okay. So, and that's still the paradigm. I can see something that I think is wrong. I'm going to fix the thing that's wrong, and you're going to be out of pain. And still, that's the rationale behind millions and millions of dollars of surgery and thousands of operations. And unfortunately, it doesn't work. It doesn't work well enough to justify all the money and all the operations that are thrown at it, unfortunately. And this is known. This is the Lancet says this, the big medical journal in the UK. Best practice from shoulder surgeons demonstrates this. People who research knees, surgeons who do knee surgery know that most of the time they've got huge placebo effects happening, but they're still doing the operations. It's really strange. There's really great evidence within the medical community that the theories used to justify surgery are really shaky because they're based on these linear models of a fixed input leads to a fixed output of pain. Gosh, so we're going to celebrate complexity by saying that pain is not a pure sensation, but a complex perception. We're aligning ourselves with Aristotle, and we're moving away from the Descartesian or Cartesian linear model. Pain is always about emotion. It's always about story. The danger signal comes from the periphery, maybe, but when it meets your nervous system and your immune system, it meets you and all the beautiful complexities of you. Here's some leading pain theorists talking about what pain is. So Fernando Severo was the head of the International Association of Pain, the IASP. That's a very influential organization. It's a collection of anesthesiologists who manage pain. That's their job. So he was the chair of that organization, and this book was written from his lifelong experience of working with pain. So he says it's very hard to measure pain. Pain is a complex experience that can only be measured by the verbal report of patients. If someone says they're in pain, they are in pain. That's the only way we can actually honor someone's internal experience. We can use scales, we can use questionnaires, but you really cannot rely on imaging to determine how much pain someone is in. It's always more complex than that. So really, really powerful evidence from a leading figure, the head, the chair of the International Association of Pain. Pain is a complex experience that can only be measured by verbal report of patients. Let's look at a couple of other definitions. This is a nice one, 2013. Pain is a subjective experience that protects the body. This is really nice. It's subjective, so it depends on the individual. Depends on the stories I make, depends on my history. Sometimes our life throws us difficult events, like my grandmother had pain, my mother had pain, therefore I'm going to get pain. And we're already primed to have that. Subjectively, I've got some danger messages that make me more likely to overinterpret my experiences. And the purpose of pain also comes out of this quote. Pain is a protector. The role of pain is to protect the body. Short term, that's largely a useful framework. Pain does protect us. It stops us from doing too much. But persistent pain is much more in the mistake territory. It's a habit. It's an unconscious overprotective reflex that's outlived its initial useful phase of protecting the body. Here's another really lovely pain definition. I like this one because it also implies solutions. Pain is at a very fundamental level all about your brain's assessment of safety. Unsafe things hurt. If your brain thinks you're safe, your pain goes down. So if you perceive differently, if you can change your viewpoint, if you can frame something as dangerous, that was dangerous, as something that you can explore, you can slowly meet, you can gently learn, then your pain experience will change, because pain is a complex perception that depends on all sorts of things, not least your stress level, not least your financial status, not least your power dynamics in the world. If you're lower down the power scale, you're more likely to be stressed, you're more likely to be sensitive, you're more likely to create an alarm signal from that grumbling back. Everything that weighs you down will contribute to you feeling unsafe and will likely to increase and amplify your pain experience. And finally, just last one, really reinforcing this, pain definitions from leading scientists. This is Professor Lorimer Moseley. He's one of the really great explainers of pain. His framework is pain is a protective feeling. If you take anything away from this lecture, it's like pain is an attempt to protect me, often overprotecting, often a habitual process. But at root, it's trying to protect me. Thank you for protecting me. Maybe you don't need to do that quite as much. So we no longer think of pain as a measure of tissue damage. We now think of pain as a complex and highly sophisticated protective mechanism. This complex and sophisticated protective mechanism can make mistakes. It can get stuck overprotecting you. And this is the problem of pain. Good. Let's take a pause there and see where we are. So CRPS, chronic regional pain syndrome. I'll talk a little bit of that, but right at the end. Sometimes, though, our pain systems get so confused that everything gets amplified, and we have changes in our immune system, changes in our hormone levels, and everything's going really, really amplified, and everything's screaming danger. And we get multiple systems that are working way too hard. But I'm going to offer, whatever the outputs to protect, the answer is always more safety. And it may not be, this sense of safety and habits is important to understand. Consciously, you may decide I'm safe, but unconsciously, there's protective reflex that are habitually kicking in because at some stage they perceived that something was unsafe. So unlearning that is complex. I'll try and talk to that a little bit later. Yes, again, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. I'll try and speak to those simply right at the end. Good. Can people see this image, the biopsychosocial model? A couple of people are saying that the screen is stuck. So just let me know that you can see the new slide, the biopsychosocial model. Great, thank you. Ian, what's pain protecting us from? The perception of danger. It's not real, it's what the brain decides is unsafe, and that involves all sorts of contextual clues and histories. Let's look at some of the things that are dangerous for human beings. So the old model, the Cartesian model, was just the biology. Something wrong in the tissues was the primary driver of pain. And we might say that inflammation wasn't good. We could be unlucky with our genetics. We might have faulty danger systems. Nociception is a fancy word for danger systems. And we might have loaded our tissues too much. But this was seen as the core of pain, the biology, the problems in the tissues. There were issues in the tissues. That was a phrase I learned as a chiropractor. Modern understandings of pain make it much more complex. This model says it's also about your psychology, your beliefs, your thoughts, your predictions, your feelings. So if I believe that old people have more pain and I'm worried about getting old, then that's going to make me more sensitized and more likely to overprotect myself when I feel a tweak in my back when I get to a certain age. knowledge, beliefs, really, really important. Certain cultures don't have whiplash. There's no reward for whiplash. So in England and America, there's a huge insurance industry where you get reward financially for having a whiplash injury. So within the society, in the culture, there's a model of whiplash takes months and months and it's really bad and you should get insurance for it. So if you believe that whiplash is bad, if your culture tells you that whiplash is bad, guess what? It's more likely to have a worse prognosis. There are some countries where they have no insurance culture around whiplash, and they have no belief that it's any more difficult than any other type of neck pain, and they recover more quickly from exactly the same type of injuries. So the unsafe mechanism is actually in the beliefs and in the culture. We are all influenced by our experiences, what happened in our families, the things that we believe, the things that we've learned, and we're all influenced by our faith, our community, and our colleagues. So this is a nice model to celebrate the complexity and say that your culture you're embedded in is important to explore. Your previous experiences and the things you've learned are important to explore. It's much more than your biology. Let's look at some of the social drivers for health. This is a lovely book from 2009, that health gets worse at every step down the social ladder, so that the poor are less healthy than those in the middle, who are in turn less healthy than those who are further up. So you're more likely to be in pain if you are at the bottom of the social ladder. Very, very clear data, unequivocally clear data. This has no relationship to the actual tissue damage. It really blows apart the Cartesian model. If poverty is an indicator that you're more likely to be less healthy, then it can't be about tissue damage, can it? This is unequivocal data. Here's a repetition or reinforcing this. The CDC in America, 2016. They're reinforcing 1 in 5 people have chronic pain. They have a high impact chronic pain, which is, I guess, more severe consequences for their life. That's almost 1 in 10 people with high impact chronic pain. So this is reinforcing what we talked about before, a huge amount of pain. They found that the people in chronic pain are more likely to be living in poverty, more likely to have lower level education, and more likely to have poor health insurance. Gosh, so we absolutely know that pain is much more than tissue damage. It's about your experience of power, your experience of being validated, or of having choices or having agency in your life. Let's reinforce that. One more incredible study, pain and the social sense. So this is looking at meanings around you and what the consequences are of being in pain. So one of the pain changes our ability to be powerful in the world. I can't do things. I need to depend on people. I'm less valuable. I can't work. These consequences of pain, or these social powers and pressures, are absolutely drivers of people feeling more unsafe. So people in pain feel as though they have no control. They feel excluded, and there's often an associated sense of injustice. So feeling as though life is unfair, or knowing that people are abusing power over you, knowing that you are excluded and knowing that you have no control, will predict that you will be in more pain. Again, a completely known non-tissue drivers of people suffering with pain. Pain is complex. It's never just about the tissues. Pain exists inside a person, and a person exists inside a world. We are embedded in the world, and we are extraordinarily sensitive to what's happening around us and the histories and lessons that we've learned. We used to think that the social drivers and the contextual things and the beliefs were small effects. We now know that the majority of persistent pain is due to these social and cultural factors. These aren't small things, folks. These are really, really, really important things to take on board when you're examining people in persistent pain. People often feel disempowered, they feel hopeless, they don't understand what's going on, and they can't afford to get good advice or good healthcare. And they're embedded in stories that make them feel more unsafe. I'm helpless. There's nothing I can do about it. No one's listening to me. No one understands my experience. This stuff is much, much more a driver of the pain experience than the alignment of your spine or arthritic conditions, for example. Good. So one way of kind of simplifying that is to really understand, when I hear the word pain, I swap the word suffering. For me, that helps me take me into this existential territory that pain always has meaning, always has consequences for me about how I relate to other people and about how I relate to myself. So I think that's a very, very useful shift. Acknowledging that pain is always about suffering, that takes us into this complex experience where pain is not linear and suffering is a fundamental challenge for human beings and involves everything that's relevant to me as a human being. This is absolutely one of my favorite books around pain, The Story of Pain. She looks at the history of pain and philosophical asides. And she really makes this offering that pain and suffering should be considered as interchangeable. Good. Okay, well, time's moving on. I'm going to start looking at some ways of managing pain and just looking at metaphors. And if pain is about meaning, let's look at different stories and different metaphors that might help us change our pain experience. Let me just have a file through the questions and see if I'm missing anything really, really important. Good, yes. So pain that doesn't make sense, Helen, in the Q&A answer. Absolutely. If you think it's mysterious, if you think it's out of your control, and if you've been told scary things by doctors or scary things by people in your culture, then yes, that's going to amplify the sense of danger and that's going to increase your pain experience. Full stop. Jonathan, how have I personally worked to hold dual perspectives and challenge your perceptions, interpretation? Any tips or practices? Gosh, yeah. Well, I've learned not to trust my perceptions. And that's hard. I used to say the only thing you can trust is your own experience. I don't say that anymore. Experience, histories, we have to investigate. We can't take the surface perception as truth, really. We have to really work it out and dig in and really examine it from different angles and explore different ways of feeling. Humans are quite lazy, gloomy predictors. We tend to predict the worst thing. So one bad experience tends to outweigh many, many good experiences. Let me give you a graphic example of that. One cockroach in a bowl of cherries, no one's going to eat the cherries. Yeah. So one bad experience wipes out all sorts of good experience. One horrible pain experience tends to stick around. I hurt my back 10 years ago. Every time I get a little grumble in my back, my brain predicts it's going to be a disaster. It's the cockroach in the bowl of cherries. You've moved your back load, your back can bend, it's really strong. But the horrible experience outweighs all the good experiences. This is really, really hard. Unfortunately, we need lots and lots of reinforcing to overwrite negative bad experiences. Yeah? And that takes work and practice and encouragement and graded exposure, slow ways of gently reconstructing. I'm safe to move, safe to feel. My back isn't injured. That was 10 years ago. I've recovered. It might be a bit stiffer, but I can still move it and find new ways of working with it. Good. I'm going to just rattle through my slides. I want to finish on some metaphors, and I want to just look at some simple tools to change pain that people can take away. So do keep putting the questions in and I'll try and summarize them right at the end. So the first way, if pain is a perception, perception involves meaning, meaning always involves stories. Stories and metaphors are very, very powerful. So here's David Butler. All pain descriptors are metaphors. Pain is always like something. We can never truly describe it in other than comparing it to something else. So this is a deep truth about all perception, actually. We can only compare it to others' experiences. So metaphors and descriptors are how we know pain. We actually journey outwards to our culture when we experience pain. We can only interpret it in the tools we've been given by our families, our loved ones, and our cultures. It's an interesting model, that. So yeah, this is a lovely book on pain. It takes you an hour and a half to read it, and it's full of good jokes. Again, another really good book on pain. This is a French sign of pain. So bread is a little joke here. So here's a descriptor of pain that is quite useful for many people. I'd like you to think of persistent pain as an alarm system gone wrong. We have a threat detection system or danger sensing mechanisms inside our brain. And I like you to think of pain as like a smoke detector. I grew up in the 1980s when smoke detectors were first around. My dad put one on in the kitchen and it used to go off every time the toaster went off. So in the end, he just banged it with a broom and it broke and we didn't have a smoke detector. The smoke detector should only go off when the house is burning down. When the house burns down, it makes a horrible loud noise that dominates. We have to do something about it. However, the smoke detector, if it senses smoke from a toast that isn't dangerous, it makes exactly the same loud, horrible noise. Oh dear, that's a problem. It's not in relationship to the amount of damage. Your house is not in danger. There's just a little bit of innocuous sensation, but exactly the same horrible signal. And our alarm signal is worse than that. It doesn't just give you a loud, noisy, horrible sensation of pain. It changes everything. It starts flushing the toilet, changing your digestive system. It turns on the lights in the living room. It changes every system in the body. So your smoke detector is now hardwired and causes havoc in everything electrical, everything going on in the house. So our hormone system changes and our immune system changes. The sensitization in the immune system turns out to be one of the places where things get really confused by the danger signals. So pain is much more than a brain story and a nervous system story, actually. What's sensitized is all your hormone production systems, all your immune cells are sensitized. They start trying to protect you by producing stress responses, or they start trying to protect you by producing inflammatory responses. All of this is because there's an oversensitive alarm system that sends out protective messages. So maybe try that for yourself. Yes, there's an alarm system, and yes, it's horrible. It's trying to protect me, but it might be an innocuous signal like burning the toast rather than I really damaged my back. That did take a little bit of time to repair, but that was a while ago. Now it's repaired and it's just an alarm system gone wrong. The input-output model, Descartes said that pain is like a keyboard. When you type in XXX, you get XXX. That's a linear model. Unfortunately, in pain, everything gets confused. You're sensitized. When you type in XXX, you get a whole jumble of horrible things. Every system in your body is in chaos trying to protect you and overprotecting you, and it gets stuck in bad habits. Cool. Let's keep going. The most common metaphors around people in persistent pain. So I'm offering a helpful one. Pain is a protective. I hope it's helpful. I hope it sticks for you. Here's some beliefs that don't tend to work very well in pain. So this was a great study, 2017, looking at people in persistent pain and trying to draw out what were the underlying ways that they described their pain experience. So metaphors that don't work very well. I'm a broken machine. This is the linear model. Something's out of line. My pelvis is unstable. My back is the wrong shape. My shoulder is damaged. My knee is weak. My foot arch is dropped. I don't walk properly. I don't sit properly. I don't stand properly. I'm a broken machine. These metaphors really don't help people. They make us feel helpless. They make us feel powerless. And they can be unintentionally reinforced by images on x-rays and a doctor sucking his teeth in and saying, wow, you've got the back of a 70-year-old. Me as a chiropractor, I used to say to people, you've got one leg shorter than the other. I really regret saying that. For years, I was taught to say that. It inherently makes people feel vulnerable. It tells them that you're a broken machine. It's amazing. You're not walking around in circles. You've got one leg shorter than the other. These things are really promote danger messages. They increase the feeling of being unsafe. They increase our sense of powerlessness. There's nothing I can do. The other metaphor, I'm broken, but it's permanent. You'll frequently hear people say that my pelvic floor was damaged in childbirth, and it's still damaged. And that's why I'm in pain. So something terrible happened, but this sense that it's inoperable, incurable, there's nothing I can do about it. Your pelvic diaphragm is incredibly responsive. There's lots of muscles you can learn to train. There's lots of ways of feeling it differently, promoting new blood flow, of learning to tune in and not feel shame or be overwhelmed at some of the things that might have happened to your pelvic floor. You reduce the stress, you focus on the bits you can improve. You can improve the tone of your pelvic floor. You can improve the blood flow by de-stressing. You can help yourself come back into relationship to this thing that you did construct as permanently damaged and realize it's still adaptable, still flexible. Bodies are incredible. When I hear these metaphors, I always talk about the Paralympics. People who've got one leg or have incredibly different bodies can still do incredible things. So it's much better to think of your body as a garden, as a flexible, growing, living thing, and something that adapts and inherently has this ability to adapt and can be like a growing shoot that grows through concrete. We can overcome huge things if we really focus on the fact that we're adaptable, and it's much more about the sensitivity rather than the actual state of the tissues. So yeah, if you notice yourself describing your pain because I'm broken and you hear the words permanent, really try and explore that. Maybe get help to explore that, because almost certainly this is a really, really difficult thing to believe about yourself. And it really doesn't honor your inherent ability to adapt. Good. I'm running over time a little bit, so I'm going to keep going just with principles to change pain. Stories are important, metaphors are important, was the essence of that last section. Here's a really great story from a hero of the pain world, I think. Joella Belton was a firewood person with a persistent pain experience. She got loads of manipulation, loads of trying to exercise and get strong. She articulates and writes really beautiful. My Cup of Joe is her website, highly recommended. So she comes from a persistent pain experience, and she used to work from the linear model that things were out of place. So this is her describing her pain now. I still have the same thunks, clicks, and weird stiffness in my right hip that made it feel more difficult than my left, but it's no longer painful. I wonder if it's because the thunking, stiff weirdness doesn't worry me now. I don't think of it as something as wrong. It's just something. It's a strange sensation. It's exactly the same sensation, but I'm not alarmed by it now. I have a different story. I don't think I'm broken, and I don't think it's permanent. Beautiful, beautiful illustration of the principle I've been trying to talk about. Pain is always more complex than the structures. It's about our sensitivities and our stories much more than the structures. Let's rattle through some principles to change pain. We're going to meet the donkeys. We're going to take the load off the donkey. If you're the donkey in this metaphor. So in England, we have the phrase, everything but the kitchen sink. This is an overloaded donkey, and it has even a kitchen sink on its back. It's just got too much load. Our notion of load is losing sleep, dealing with huge emotional changes, poor nutrition, and living in inequality. So all of these are not just the load of the tissues, but all the loads we're carrying in our life. Really important to expand out from just mechanic when we use the word load. Here's an overloaded donkey. This is going to be an exhausted donkey at the end of the day, isn't it? This is just too much. This donkey is going to have no time for a libido, no time for a digestion, no time for an immune system that's going to be able to fight all sorts of weird things. An exhausted donkey, all its resources are carrying this. This is an overloaded donkey that's dissociated. It's so much load, it loses its ground, and we often collapse internally and disappear. The next couple of slides are quite hard, folks. So if we overload ourselves continually, we're going to collapse. There's a limit to any load that people can carry. Even if we reduce the load, it takes time to recover. So if you've been pushing yourself to the max, if you live in an unjust society and you can't escape from it, it takes time to really find your strength and community and to recover. Healing takes time, folks. If you're an overloaded donkey, the thing, we need to change all the loads. So look at this donkey. This donkey has too much weight on its back. If this donkey comes into my office and I say the front leg is the problem and I try and make that leg stronger, or I try and fix the knee by aligning it, I am completely missing the point. This leg is a problem. Yes, it's collapsed and it's weak and it's vulnerable, but the leg isn't the problem. The load is the problem. So, gosh, so many times we need to step back and realize that the person in pain is getting divorced. They feel undervalued at work. They've got financial worries and they're arguing with their partner. Those are the loads that are scaring them, that are causing all their system to be sensitized. The mechanical thing that's presenting is rarely the source of the problem. When we meet health, it's obvious. There's vitality that you can spot and know. Learn to feel this in yourself and learn to remember it and know that it's possible. Health is playful and creative. When you're stuck, it feels as though we can't do anything. I would really encourage being playful, learning to do a little bit more than you did before, but not too much. No movement should be off limits. Graded exposure, slowly trying new things and trying to, that shoulder moves, that was a bit sticky, let's move it slightly differently, and you will generally recalibrate your alarm systems. So some principles to change pain. Education, that pain is a protective feeling, not an accurate readout of the tissues. It's an alarm system that's gone wrong. We want to slowly play with new movements, but moving is always useful. Whatever movement you can't do, adapt, find a little bit of that movement, keep playing with it. There's always creative ways to move, but stopping movement and not doing things is a really bad strategy. Really doesn't work. Keep feeling. So learn to feel all the flows and movements inside of your body. Pain is like the noisy child in in a classroom of 30. When we're in pain, we're only listening to that noisy child. We don't pay attention to the itch, the vibration, the warmth, the size, the shape, the weight. If we listen to those other 29 children in that classroom, they will naturally regulate and diminish the noise from that screaming child. So there's always more to feel than the pain. Keep feeling, keep feeling, keep feeling. Find things that feel safe. Move towards, move away. Play with what you're feeling. Is it true? How do I know that this is damaged? How do I know these things? Maybe get support to practice feeling. But yeah, we can always find more detail and refine our awareness of our body. And finally, pain is a measure of danger. Pain emerges when our brain thinks something is unsafe. So anything you can do to promote safety will turn down the volume on the pain experience. Here we go. Here's a human being. Here's danger. If there's the perception of danger, pain tries to protect us. We have all sorts of other ways of protecting us, collapsing and dissociating, generating a stress response, triggering our immune system and generating tiredness. For people with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, who are stuck with anxiety and anger, who feel collapsed and helpless, this is all associated with outputs to protect. These are all rooted in the perception of danger. If danger is the problem, finding safety is the solution. Safe to move, safe to feel, safe to relate, safe to explore. Anything you can do to promote safety is going to help turn down your pain experience. Here we go. Become a happy donkey. Good luck, folks. Be creative in feeling, moving, and playing, and realize that the story can always be constructed differently. And the stories you're embedded in are incredibly important, much more important than the actual structures.